Welcome back to DC EKG with myself, Joe Grogan, and Eric Euland. We're joined by Mark Paoletta, author of Created Equal, about Clarence Thomas. But we've been discussing with him his expertise in oversight, both in on Capitol Hill, but also as an attorney in private practice. So let's dive into three areas specifically that the House may want to get into. Just in the past few weeks, we've watched FTX meltdown and turmoil in the cryptocurrency market. Some of the stories that are being littered across the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, paint a very interesting portrait of the gentleman who was running FTX. If you were up on the Hill, I know it's early, there's a lot of noise out there, but boom, you mentioned earlier, you read the newspaper when you're running House investigations. Yeah. Is this something they're going to look at?
Yeah, I would. I kind of liken it, we were just talking about to Enron, and something that blew up. People weren't really watching it and getting your head around that and doing a deep dive into it. So yeah, I absolutely think that the House and the Senate, for that matter, should look into what happened there, because it looks like a lot of people lost a lot of money, and sort of the representations and what the agencies should or could have been doing. It's really to kind of jump in and figure out what happened here, right? Mm-hmm. To understand it, but that means sending letters to the company, document requests, subpoenas if necessary, to the individual who runs that company. But yeah, it clearly looks like something that should be looked into.
Let's go back to Enron as an example for 1 second and tell me whether or not this is off base. But I felt like during the Enron investigation, it was really complicated what those guys were doing, the types of financial instruments they were playing with. It would be difficult for the average American to understand what was going on with Enron. I don't think a lot of people understand cryptocurrency. Matter of fact, that's probably, when it comes up in conversation, the first thing people say to me is, I don't fully understand it. Is there an art to explaining really complicated financial transactions and stuff to the general public and to the media to kind of get people invested in it? Because it seems to me you could go down rabbit holes.
It's a great point. Enron was complicated. It's a long time ago. It's fun to have something that happened so long ago, sort of, in terms of like things never change, right? Yep. In terms of those sorts of things, certainly in congressional investigations, and greed, and sort of how people try and game systems, right? Love capitalism, but there's going to be, in my view, on those sorts of investigations. We did WorldCom, as I said, we did a number of those. We ran into a bunch of those corporate entities that were doing a number of. They were capacity swaps, or they were these. It is complicated, but at the end of the day, it was doing fake transactions to boost your revenue, right, on the books, and to get more stock, to have your stock go up, and it was all a sham. And so, at a certain level, Joe, it's not complicated. And I'm just a dogged investigator. There are a lot of smarter people than me, but I could even understand that. And looking internally, when you get the documents and what they were talking about in terms of doing that, I remember with, I think it was the Global Crossing. I think we looked at Quest, and they were all trying to meet their quarter, their end of the quarter numbers, and they were doing crazy. They were capacity swaps, or they were these deals that were just completely bogus, right? Yeah. But they were showing up. So that's, at the end of the day, what was going on. It was all to boost the stock price, right, and to make more money, and to have their, and to have their own sort of compensation and stock value go up. So that might be here. I'm not sure. Crypto is something that I've read a couple of times about, and I still don't understand it. But you're going to have investigators up there that will spend the time to understand it and do a deep dive. And I think it should be something, because I do think it's something that people have been pushing as a new form of currency. That's the future, and this looked like it bottomed out.
And a lot of people invested in it, right? So there will also be people who are hurt or damaged by this fiasco that are also potentially sympathetic witnesses.
And I remember when we were doing, I think it was Global Crossing, I mean, the people who lost their 401ks because of all these bogus transactions and funding. And we had people, so when I had those hearings, I had people who lost their life savings come testify, right? This is hurting people. It's not just some rich guys that are getting hurt, or some company, but it's actually hurting, people who lost their life savings. So definitely think Congress should look at it.
How about we could talk all day about FTX, and maybe we'll have another opportunity with more information comes out. But let's talk about Afghanistan for a second.
Sure.
So recently there was a letter just in the past few weeks, I think, where the Inspector General basically threw up his hands and said, I can't get any information on what happened in Afghanistan. I give up. I can't issue a report. Is that an accurate characterization?
I think it is. So there's a special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. His name is John Sopko. I think he's been in there probably 10 years, maybe longer. He's an old friend of mine. He worked up on the Hill. He was a Dingell staffer and John Dingell, former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Democrat.
Democrat.
Long-term, very
He was on a strike. He was on
influential.
a DOJ strike force back doing stuff in Cleveland, I think. One of those movies that was on one of his cases. And great guy, a good investigator. Worked for Carl Levin in the Senate on
Senator from Michigan.
Senator from Michigan on that investigative committee over there for many, many years. So he's a seasoned investigator. He's been doing a lot of work over in Afghanistan over the years, and he always comes out with these very, headline-grabbing reports about the amount of fraud or the amount of waste or the amount of, all sorts of, problematic things that are going over in Afghanistan, quite apart from the pullout. And he just wrote a letter, and he had responded to, I think, a briefing or something like that with the House side, that he has been literally stonewalled by the Biden administration. He couldn't report on what was going on because I think it was USAID and probably Treasury and other key agencies had literally just stonewalled him and not given him any information. And so that's what's going on and hasn't been covered by, in my view, the media in terms of the Biden administration just completely, blowing off requests. And this isn't even from the Republican Congress. This is from an Inspector General. Mm-hmm. And so I think you're going to see a lot. That was obviously a terrible tragedy. And when I say a tragedy, just a reckless, terrible decision by the Biden administration, the way they did that, way they executed the pullout. Pulling out, absolutely, the pullout. And we were getting out of Afghanistan, or we're going to be lowering it. It's just the way he did it and the way he left people behind, and how 13 soldiers were killed over there. So there needs to be some accountability there.
So how do you do it? Let's say we buy in. Okay, yes, we need oversight here. Uland spent some time running around the State Department. In the previous conversation, when we were talking about how to do sort of a left hook, right jab, you can go after the private sector entities and the executive branch. They've been stymied by the executive branch here. I'm making an assumption that there are not as many private sector actors that you can jam up and send letters to say, hey, what happened here? Can you go after state? I mean, USAID is part of state. I mean, how would you do Afghanistan quickly before we talk a little bit about COVID?
Look, I think that sometimes, investigations, some might think of them as partisan. Like say you could pick one of them even that the Republicans may look at, right? COVID might be viewed as partisan by some, right? It shouldn't be. But the Afghan pullout, nobody thinks is partisan. That was a universally denounced effort, right, or action. And so I think bringing those actions to the light of day, this is where congressional oversight done well, and having people come testify, trying to get the documents. It may be that they push back. They say they're classified. They say whatever they push back on. There aren't a lot of outside actors on this, Joe. I agree with you. But I do think that bringing up the DOD and the State Department for hearings and some of the people affected over there and the families and having them testify will help shake loose some additional information because I do think it was such a damaging failure by the Biden administration.
So you're absolutely right that primarily that was a set of governmental decisions by the Biden administration. I do think, however, there would also be an opportunity to talk with the contractor community, people actually providing services and goods inside the country about what happened, the damage that this quick bug out caused, and the consequences after we left that are still unfolding today.
I agree.
But Joe, you did raise COVID, where I know over the past couple of years there's been a lot of conversation, incoming Republican majority, and a lot of public concern about what happened over the past couple of years. And then we've seen a prominent article in a magazine, The Atlantic, in the last couple of weeks, pleading for a COVID amnesty for people who made decisions throughout the COVID pandemic and the aftermath. With Republicans becoming a majority, tell us a little bit about how you would start framing an investigation of what happened during COVID, decisions made that may or may not have been the right call at the time.
Yeah, so there should not be a COVID amnesty, in my opinion. And what I mean by that, there should be accountability, like there should be in all government decisions. To me, there are two big sort of buckets. One is sort of there's been a lot of stuff back and forth on this already, right, in terms of trying to get some information. But it's the origin, right, of the virus and how it came to be. And what you see, right, with Anthony Fauci and some of his colleagues, there was an absolute effort to silence, destroy people who were raising questions about that, right? And so,
using official government organizations, information, and ultimately talking directly to people, it appears, in the media and the private sector to say, don't repeat that, read them out of the room,
right.
Don't let them have access to information, all sorts of extraordinary behaviors.
So again, this idea that we didn't know what we were doing, or this the amnesty thing is, hey, we were working our way through this and we didn't know what the right answers were, and we were, learning as we went along. That's not what happened, right? What happened was people were making decisions that were definitive in a way and denouncing others and trying to attack them, as you said, Eric, and write them out of jobs, write them out of like civil society, and that was just wrong, and it hurt us. It hurt kids, it hurt parents, it hurt the American community. And so so looking at, those are document requests into NIH, those are document requests into, CDC, into the White House and all sorts of agencies that were involved. It is also with, as I said, the outside groups, so, again, to me, there's the origin of it.
One big bucket.
That's one big bucket. And then the other one is the decision to keep the lockdown, particularly in schools, against, in my view, what was evidence and clear evidence that it wasn't harming in terms of the risk. It was a lot more harmful to keep kids out of school and do this distance learning than to put them in school and take appropriate protections. And yet that was something that, again, I think there was this effort to destroy anyone who raised the option of we should have our kids back in school. And looking at the communications with the folks that were most involved with that was the American Federation of Teachers, right? AFT, right?
Based on what we know so far.
Based on what we know so far, again, investigations lead where they are, but she seemed to be very involved with those sorts of decisions and pushing them, and just to see, hey, what were the communications with, with the administration, in whatever year it happened, in terms of those decisions, and how are they driving and how are they involved with those sort of the policy making.
Now, you mentioned earlier there are about 20 standing committees in the House, but that every committee should do oversight. I presume, though, that some committees have a stronger oversight muscle than others. So inside COVID, a lot of healthcare, a lot of private sector, to your point, education, and committees that kind of match up with these. But where would there be a centralized location to go for a COVID oversight or investigation? Would there be 2 or 3 primary committees that would be responsible for this? Again, would you spread it across as many committees as had a role or programs had a role under their jurisdiction for COVID?
I think it should be, I'm not a big fan of select committees, so I don't think a select committee should be set up, right? I think it should be either the Energy and Commerce or the House Oversight Committee. Now, there are other committees that might have some jurisdiction over it, but I think that between those two committees...
Wait, back up. Why do you not like select committees?
You're pulling people. Usually, a lot of times they're funded. They don't get their own funding, or they don't get enough funding, or they're pulling from other committees. And
So I'm sorry. So let's just explain this to people who may not know. So select committee it's outside of the normal committee jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And they get a pot of money, and you get a cross-functional group of people, or you got to staff up, and their only job is we are looking at this subject, and you don't like them because there's no legislative authority behind them, like with Energy and Commerce, or you think it takes them too long to set up? Why do you think they're ineffective? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that the standing committees are the people who have the expertise, right? Number one. So why wouldn't you have the Energy and Commerce Committee or the House Oversight Committee that's been looking at this already continue to do that work, right? Second, a lot of times select committees are set up and they don't have full funding, or they have, I'm not sure how it would be, so that they're using people that are on committees and they're being detailed over to another committee, and their members are now on different. To me, it's just it's just setting up another entity that is, in my view, a lot of times a distraction from what the standing committees that do this work day in and day out.
In your opinion, does Congress do that to kind of punt the ball, or do they generally not understand? I mean, sometimes you see, anytime I hear about a blue ribbon bipartisan commission, I'm like, shoot me, it's not going to do anything. So that's their way of not confronting a hard issue. Is that the same bucket with select committees, or do you think that they may be well-intentioned, but they're not as effective as a committees with jurisdictions oversight? What's your take on why people would set up a select committee if you are an expert and you don't think they would?
I mean, select committees sound good. Like, we're focused. We're going to do, we're going to have a select committee on COVID, and so that's going to be their only focus. That's why it's so important to us for setting up a select committee. But at the end of the day, I spent 10 years up there. I think my experience with select committees and watching some select committees is that it's just better left with the standing committee to do the work.
I also think there's a little bit of history sometimes, and again, kind of Mark's point, reinforces public focus or leadership focus. But look, we had the Senate Select Committee on Watergate. We had the Select Committee on Iran-Contra. We had a Select Committee on Katrina. We have a Select Committee right now on a piece of what happened after COVID and the climate crisis. But you could hear in the titles, they match the importance of the moment and are going to drive public conversation, or maybe they don't succeed as well. And kind of to your point, some of these later select committees also don't really have strength or expertise, or certainly the tools to drive an outcome. So institutionally, I think Congress has experimented with select committees, but right now it seems like standing committees have more of the juice.
And again, I may just be coming out of a committee process. I mean, the other thing is you have the expertise, and also that committee is doing the work. That's learning, okay, what are the changes we need to make when we get done with this investigation with CDC, with NIH, with whatever the industries are that actually are coming before those committees, right? Select committees come and go, but if you're looking at the companies that may have been involved, or that have where that standing committee is the authorizing committee for a lot of the programs that those companies are involved with, or those agencies, CDC, NIH, they're going to be dealing with, let's just say, the Energy and Commerce Committee forever on. Right. And so a select committee is just a different, and so whatever information you're gathering too, right, you need to then sort of transfer that. And it's more organic when it happens inside an investigative committee that's got the jurisdiction over those programs, right? If it's the FCC and the program that we did looking at all the waste, fraud, and abuse with the E-rate program, that's what it was called, the E-rate program, right? Or the hospital billing of the uninsured. We know what hospitals do, right? We know the billing system. We know the reimbursement stuff, right, in terms of the folks that are there. So you're doing an investigation within the context of that expertise, and it just carries on to the next step. And I think select committees take it away from that.
Okay. All right. Well, this conversation could go on for days. And like I said, I hope we have the opportunity at some point in the future to bring you back and have another in-depth discussion, maybe about one in particular that's gaining a lot of attention on Capitol Hill. But we have to get to your book, Created Equal, the story of Clarence Thomas, which you wrote recently. So when we get back, we're going to dive into the book, okay?
Great.
Stay tuned.